Carl Jung said that we all wear a mask. But what would happen if one day it fell off? In today's video, you will discover the truth behind the archetype of the persona, that social face we show to the world, but which often hides who we truly are. Get ready, because by the end of this video you will see yourself in a way you may have never imagined. And you will understand why Jung believed that living only through the mask can be one of the greatest dangers to the human soul. And pay attention. Here on the channel we will reveal secrets and interpretations of Carl Jung that are rarely explored, things never before revealed to the general public. So subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us on this journey, because what you're about to hear today may change the way you see your own life. The invisible mask we all carry. Carl Jung, in developing his theory of the human psyche, brought forth a concept that still provokes both discomfort and fascination to this day: the idea of the persona. For Jung, the persona is not merely a poetic metaphor or a literary image, but a psychological reality that shapes our interactions with the world. It is the invisible mask we carry every day, a tool for social survival, created not only to protect us but also to integrate us into the collective fabric that surrounds us. Yet, when we look closely, we realize that this mask, though necessary, is both a shield and a prison. The persona emerges in a child's earliest interactions with society. It appears when parents say, "Behave yourself," when school demands silence, when religion teaches moral codes. The child learns, almost unconsciously, that there is a difference between what they feel and what they are allowed to show. This is how the mask is born, a socially acceptable face, molded by external expectations. Jung saw in this an adaptive function, an inevitable path to prevent the individual from being swallowed by the chaos of collective life. After all, without the persona, communication would be impossible, for we would live exposed, fragile, and unable to meet social demands. But few ask the question: to what extent is this mask a healthy tool of adaptation, and at what point does it become a suffocating prison? Jung warned that the problem begins when we confuse the mask with our true essence. When someone starts to believe they are only the role they play, the authentic self becomes buried, lost, and the individual risks becoming a puppet of external expectations. Imagine a doctor who lives only as a doctor, a father reduced solely to his paternal role, a woman who defines herself only as a wife. They are no longer complete individuals but walking masks, social faces stripped of depth. This confusion is not only psychological but also cultural. In many societies, the more rigid the social structure, the more rigid the mask. The persona becomes like armor. It protects against judgment and rejection, yet simultaneously suffocates the inner truth. And the cost of this is high. There emerges a feeling of emptiness, of not belonging, the silent anguish of "no one truly knows me." It is a cruel paradox. The more perfect the mask, the less visible becomes the self that sustains it. Another aspect Jung highlighted is that the mask is never created by us alone. It is shaped by society, by family, by culture, by the invisible rules governing each community. It is as if each person were an actor stepping onto a stage in a play already in progress. The script has been written, the roles assigned, and the only choice left is how to perform that role. But rarely can we abandon it without paying the price of isolation or exclusion. Thus, the persona is not just an individual mask, but also a collective one, a standardized face the world demands everyone wear. What is curious is that even when we are aware of wearing masks, we often feel incapable of removing them. There is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of ridicule, fear of not being accepted. Jung observed that the more someone identifies with their persona, the greater their fragility when the mask breaks. And it always breaks. Sooner or later, life places us in situations where the social character is not enough. Crises, losses, illnesses, failures. These are moments when the mask dissolves, revealing the true self, often unknown even to the one who carries it. And here arises an inevitable question. If we all wear masks, does anyone ever truly know who we really are? When you look at your closest relationships, are you showing your essence or only the polished version you believe is acceptable? Does the mask protect or distance? Does it save us from rejection or condemn us to invisible loneliness? Carl Jung invites us to confront this unsettling truth. Not to reject the mask, because it is also necessary, but to avoid confusing it with the totality of our being. The real danger lies in living as if the mask were the only face that exists. The persona may open doors, but it will never be the home where we truly live. And you? How much of your life do you believe is guided by your essence, and how much have you merely been a character on the stage the world has set for you? The social contract of the soul. Carl Jung described the persona as an invisible agreement, a silent contract that each individual signs with the world at birth. This contract is not written on paper but inscribed in gestures, glances, and social expectations. From an early age, the child perceives that love, acceptance, and even survival depend on their ability to meet what the environment desires. It is the moment when one learns, almost instinctively, that revealing everything one truly is can be dangerous. The instinct for protection creates a facade, an edited version of ourselves, shaped not by who we are but by what others are willing to accept. This process of adaptation is so natural that we barely notice it. A child learns to be good to receive affection. A student learns to be disciplined to avoid reprimands. A man learns to appear strong so as not to be accused of weakness. Little by little, a socially useful identity is built, yet it remains profoundly distant from the essence. Jung called this construction the persona, not as falsehood, but as necessity. After all, no one could exist in a community without negotiating with the codes that govern that collective life. But this social contract carries a heavy price. For every face shown, another is hidden. For every trait highlighted, an opposite one is suppressed. The search for acceptance becomes a silent renunciation of entire parts of the soul. Thus, the individual begins to walk through life with a lingering feeling that something is missing, that life is somehow incomplete. It is as if each day served as a reminder that existence has become a carefully staged performance to please others rather than an authentic expression of what lives within. What is most intriguing is how rarely we stop to question the terms of this contract. How often have you asked yourself whether the choices you've made in life were truly yours, or merely responses to the gaze of others? The path someone follows, the career they embrace, the image they project, these may be tied more to fulfilling expectations than to answering an inner calling. Jung observed that this misalignment between the persona and the deeper self is what gives rise to seemingly inexplicable frustrations. The sense of emptiness even in the midst of success, the restlessness that lingers even after achieving social milestones. This contract of the soul, however, is not merely individual. It is collective, cultural, passed down from generation to generation. Every society creates its own acceptable masks and imposes them upon its members. In some cultures, silence is a virtue. In others, it is seen as weakness. In certain contexts, showing vulnerability is a sign of humanity. In others, it is considered a flaw. Thus, the persona becomes not only a personal pact but also a reflection of the historical time and space in which we live. Jung insisted that we should not abolish the persona, for it serves a practical purpose. The problem arises when the contract turns into a prison. The individual ceases to be a subject and becomes merely an object of the collective gaze. Life begins to be lived under the tyranny of approval, with every gesture, every word, every choice measured by the thermometer of social acceptance. And at this point, the great question emerges: where does healthy adaptation end and self-alienation begin? There is yet another crucial point. If the persona is the social contract of the soul, anyone who never dares to renegotiate that contract will live under a borrowed identity, not their own. Jung believed that true maturity begins when the individual becomes aware of this invisible pact and decides, consciously, how much of their essence they are willing to reveal, even at the risk of rejection. The path of individuation, for him, was precisely about breaking the mask's monopoly and allowing the true self to emerge without fear. And here an inevitable question arises. If much of what we show the world is merely a response to what is expected of us, has anyone ever truly known our real essence? The contract we sign with society protects us, but it also robs us. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all is, how long will you continue to pay that price? When the mask becomes a burden. Carl Jung warned of the silent risk of living solely through the persona, the mask we construct to be accepted. At first, the persona seems like an ally. It helps us navigate social expectations, gain approval, and avoid conflict. But over time, when we identify entirely with this facade, the authentic self begins to fade, disappearing behind programmed behaviors and imposed masks. This process is almost imperceptible because the persona presents itself as normality, as if it were the very essence of who we are. Yet those who observe closely can sense the silent emptiness that accompanies those who never allow themselves to be vulnerable. The confusion between mask and identity is a common trap. People who cling to their persona often feel a constant emotional exhaustion, as though they are carrying an invisible weight. Every forced smile, every compliment received, every gesture adjusted to meet others' expectations serves as a reminder that the true self is hidden, relegated to the shadow of consciousness. Jung believed that this shadow does not disappear. On the contrary, it grows stronger as every repressed desire, fear, or impulse silently accumulates. It becomes stored energy that, sooner or later, demands expression, often through outbursts of anger, anxiety, or existential crises that seem to appear out of nowhere. The deep reflection Jung proposes is simple yet painful. Who would you be if no one were watching? Without the critical gaze of society, without the need for approval, without the fear of judgment, what would your genuine expression look like? Many never allow themselves to answer this question, fearing that revealing their real self may lead to rejection or isolation. And yet, an identity built solely on the persona is fragile, vulnerable to fatigue and disillusionment. Contemporary psychological studies reinforce this view. Individuals who live too much through their persona show higher levels of stress, feelings of inadequacy, and difficulty forming deep connections. The persona, which began as protection, gradually becomes a burden, an invisible prison limiting experiences, emotions, and authentic connections. Curiously, Jung suggested that recognizing this overlap between persona and authentic self is the first step toward emotional freedom. Observing oneself, questioning oneself, noticing where the mask dictates behaviors and choices, all of this creates space for the true self to breathe. There is a paradox here. The mask is necessary to exist socially, but complete identification with it is destructive. Finding balance requires courage, self-awareness, and above all, a willingness to confront one's own shadow. So think, how often do you act merely to please, to be accepted, to fulfill a social role? And how often do you repress something essential within yourself just to maintain that image? The persona is a tool, but it can also be a prison. Recognizing the weight of this burden is the first step toward freeing the authenticity you carry but have not yet dared to reveal. The illusion of acceptance. Carl Jung invites us to question a silent yet profound phenomenon. Are we truly loved for who we are, or only for what we show ourselves to be? The persona, the carefully crafted mask designed to please and gain acceptance, creates an illusion of connection and recognition. At first, this approval feels real, but as we delve deeper into our own perception, we realize that many relationships are built upon expectations rather than essence. This realization brings forth a quiet unease that few dare to name. The illusion of acceptance is not merely an emotional matter, but a complex psychological process. When the persona receives praise and validation, our brain associates these external responses with self-worth, reinforcing the habit of performing roles rather than expressing authentic feelings. Approval seems like nourishment for self-esteem, yet in reality, it only sustains the mask. Jung pointed out that this dynamic creates a dangerous cycle. The more we identify with the persona, the more we depend on others' acceptance, and the more we depend on it, the further we drift from our true self. It is fascinating to observe how this dynamic manifests across different aspects of life. At work, We may receive recognition for the role we play, but never for our real talent or vulnerability. In friendships, we may be admired for certain superficial traits, while the deeper aspects of our personality remain hidden. In romantic relationships, the persona creates unrealistic expectations that eventually clash with authenticity, leading to quiet frustrations and, often, emotional distance. Jung warned of the hidden price of this pursuit of approval, the feeling of loneliness even when surrounded by people. The unsettling question then arises: if the world only loves the mask, who truly sees us? Who loves what remains invisible, the part of us we carry deep within but rarely reveal? It is in this space between mask and essence that profound existential doubts arise, often accompanied by a silent sense of emptiness. Modern psychology reinforces this insight. Research shows that individuals who rely excessively on external approval experience higher levels of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Validation of the persona is fleeting and conditional, while recognition of the authentic self requires courage, vulnerability, and genuineness, qualities that often remain hidden behind the fear of rejection. The reflection Jung proposes is direct and unsettling. To what extent do your relationships reflect who you truly are? How many interactions are genuinely based on authenticity, and how many are silent performances designed to win approval? The illusion of acceptance challenges us to see that true love and recognition do not emerge from the mask, but from the conscious exposure of the self, with all its imperfections and contradictions. So, ask yourself, are you loved for who you really are, or only for what you choose to show? Identifying this difference may be uncomfortable, but it is the first step toward building true connections, reconstructing meaningful relationships, and allowing the essence, once hidden, to finally be seen and acknowledged. The persona and the abyss of loneliness. Carl Jung observed a profound and painful paradox. The more polished and convincing the persona, the greater the distance between the authentic self and the surrounding world. The mask, carefully constructed to impress, protect, or please, creates an invisible barrier. The individual is applauded for their performance, receives praise and recognition, yet remains isolated in their true essence. Others see only what the persona allows, an idealized, controlled, and predictable version of who they are. Behind this silent spectacle lies an abyss of loneliness that few dare to explore or admit. The loneliness caused by the persona is subtle, almost imperceptible. It is not merely about being physically alone, but about not being understood in one's entirety. Social presence may be constant, but true contact, the kind that reaches the depths of the psyche, becomes rare or non-existent. Jung believed that emotional isolation is not a consequence of external rejection but of internal detachment. The person disconnects from themselves and, consequently, from others. Every compliment directed at the mask reinforces the illusion of connection but, in truth, increases the distance from authenticity. There is a silent tension in this process. The recognition of the persona is accompanied by an inner anguish. The individual senses that something is missing, yet often cannot identify what. This emptiness arises from the fact that the true self remains hidden, imprisoned behind carefully rehearsed behaviors and appearances. Loneliness becomes an invisible companion, growing in intimacy, in moments of silence, in the sleepless hours of the night when the mind finds no rest. Furthermore, contemporary psychology confirms the impact of this dynamic. Individuals who live predominantly through the persona tend to have difficulties forming deep bonds, feel emotionally drained, and experience an intensified sense of isolation even when surrounded by people. The paradox is cruel. The mask that was meant to protect and connect actually separates. Jung proposed that the only way to reduce this loneliness is to acknowledge the abyss and look inward, to confront one's own shadow, accept imperfections, and allow fragments of the true self to emerge even in the face of social judgment. This gradual exposure does not destroy the persona. On the contrary, it transforms it into a balanced tool, a social face that coexists with authenticity without erasing essence. So reflect, how often do you feel alone even when surrounded by people? How many of your relationships engage with your essence, and how many with the mask you wear? Jung challenges us to realize that true connection does not arise from the perfection we present, but from the courage to reveal vulnerability, allowing someone to truly see what lies behind the mask. The loneliness of the actor diminishes only when the authentic self finds room to breathe behind the scenes of the soul. The shadow that revolts. Carl Jung reminds us of an inescapable truth. Everything we try to hide within ourselves does not disappear, it only accumulates. This is the shadow, the repressed, rejected, or denied side of our psyche, made up of fears, desires, impulses, and traits that society, or we ourselves, consider unacceptable. The shadow is not just an abstract concept. It is a dynamic force that, when ignored, finds ways to manifest. The more we try to dismiss it or hide it behind the persona, the stronger its silent pressure becomes. The danger arises when the shadow, repressed and denied, reaches a saturation point. This invisible buildup demands its place through emotional outbursts that often seem unexpected or irrational. Crises, breakdowns, conflicts, and ruptures may be direct manifestations of parts of ourselves that have been silenced for years. Jung described these episodes as inevitable overflows of a psyche that insists on being whole. The problem is that when the shadow emerges abruptly, it often catches us off guard, creating guilt, regret, and confusion. Recognizing the shadow requires courage and self-awareness. It means admitting that there are aspects of ourselves that do not fit the idealized image we present to the world. Every repressed impulse, every silent resentment, every hidden desire contributes to the growth of this shadow. Ignoring it allows it to dictate behaviors unconsciously, affecting decisions, attitudes, and even close relationships. For example, accumulated resentments can erupt in arguments, insecurities can sabotage opportunities, and unacknowledged fears can limit dreams and choices. A crucial point Jung emphasized is that the shadow is not an enemy. It is an essential part of the psyche, bringing important information about our limits, needs, and unmet desires. The revolt of the shadow is a call for integration, an opportunity to confront what we have denied and, in doing so, transform repressed energy into personal growth. The question is, are you willing to face what you prefer to hide? Voluntary ignorance only prolongs the tension and postpones the possibility of balance. The shadow also has a magnetic effect on relationships. People who ignore their hidden side tend to project these aspects onto others, creating conflicts and resentments. Jung believed that recognizing and accepting the shadow within oneself is the first step toward reducing projection, improving communication, and building more authentic connections. So, ask yourself, what parts of you have been hidden? How many times have you acted without realizing you were reacting to repressed impulses? The shadow does not disappear by willpower. It demands attention, and when it overflows, it makes clear that it needs to be integrated. The revolt of the shadow is not a punishment but an urgent invitation to embrace the totality of who you are, finally finding balance between mask and essence. The courage to tear the persona. Carl Jung understood that the persona is not something to be completely eliminated. It is necessary for us to interact with the world, play social roles, and protect our vulnerability. However, the real challenge lies in not fully identifying with this mask. The persona must be an instrument, not a prison. And this is where courage comes in. The courage to allow the authentic self to breathe, even if only for small moments, in the face of critical glances or silent judgments. Tearing the mask does not mean exposing every intimate detail to everyone, but rather allowing genuine aspects of our essence to appear in important interactions. Every sincere gesture, every honest opinion, and every unfiltered emotion is a small tear in the persona, but a significant step toward reconnecting with one's own authenticity. Jung believed that it is in this balance between social appearance and inner expression that we find emotional freedom. This practice requires deep self-knowledge. Who has never reflected on their automatic reactions to criticism or praise? Who has never noticed that they act more to please than to express their truth? Tearing the persona means recognizing these patterns and consciously deciding when and how to reveal our essence, even if it challenges expectations. It is an exercise in silent courage because society often rewards conformity and questions authenticity. Curiously, Jung pointed out that each small act of authenticity strengthens the psyche. When we allow the real self to manifest, even partially, we reduce the power of the repressed shadow and diminish the inner tension that arises from the dissonance between mask and essence. Each genuine gesture has a multiplying effect. It brings us closer to more sincere relationships, increases self-esteem, and creates safe spaces for others to reveal themselves as well. This courage is also tied to risk. Not everyone will welcome the fragments of truth you choose to show. There will be criticism, misunderstandings, and resistance. However, Jung reminds us that the price of absolute conformity is much greater. Disconnection from ourselves and the silent loneliness that builds up when the persona fully dominates the psyche. The courage to tear the mask, therefore, is an investment in freedom, intimacy, and emotional growth. So, ask yourself, to what extent have you been living to please or protect yourself? How many pieces of your authenticity remain hidden, suffocated by the persona? Each conscious act of revelation is a step toward a fuller life, where the mask still exists but no longer dominates. Tearing the persona is discovering that true strength does not lie in apparent perfection, but in the courage to show yourself imperfectly human. The call to inner truth. Carl Jung invites us to confront the most unsettling question of the psychic life. How many years have we spent playing roles that do not belong to us? The persona offers comfort, protection, and momentary acceptance, but it also distances us from who we truly are. According to Jung, the greatest act of freedom is not earning titles, accumulating recognition, or controlling the image others have of us. It is daring to show ourselves bare before those who matter, stripped of masks, filters, and external expectations. This exposure is not simple. It involves admitting imperfections, confronting fears, and accepting that not everyone will receive this truth with applause. Some people may step away, unsettled by authenticity that threatens their own illusions. Others will stay, connecting more deeply, because truth has a magnetic force that reveals genuine affinities. Jung believed that only through this confrontation between mask and essence is it possible to experience true intimacy and meaningful relationships. The call to inner truth requires continuous courage. It is not a single act but a daily practice of self-knowledge and honesty. Every conscious decision to express real feelings, to say no when necessary, or to admit vulnerability is a tear in the armor of the persona. This process diminishes the power of the repressed shadow, releases accumulated emotional energy, and strengthens the sense of identity. The closer we come to our inner truth, the more life sheds the weight of performance and gains depth, meaning, and authenticity. Jung also suggested that inner truth is not only an individual destination but a force that resonates collectively. People who live according to their own essence inspire others to do the same. Every act of authenticity, no matter how small, provokes reflection and change in the environments where it occurs. It is as if the freedom of one individual spreads, amplifying the courage of others to confront their own masks. However, the process is challenging because it requires facing the unknown within ourselves. Often, we discover repressed parts, hidden fears, or forgotten desires that resist emerging. Jung called this a confrontation with the shadow and stated that without this engagement, any attempt at authenticity remains superficial. The true call to inner truth is, therefore, an invitation to integrate all aspects of the psyche: light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, persona and essence. So, reflect. How many more years do you intend to spend playing roles that do not belong to you? Who truly deserves to see your essence? Would the audience applaud your truth or turn away? Jung challenges us to consciously choose between the safety of performance and the depth of authenticity. Answering this call is not easy, but it is undoubtedly the path to a fuller, freer, and truly our own life.